Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolo. Now, Britain, the royal family and the Commonwealth are in a fourth day of mourning for the Duke of Edinburgh, who died at Windsor Castle on Friday. Prince Philip had been at Queen Elizabeth's side for more than 70 years. Gun salutes have taken place across the capitals of the four nations of the United Kingdom, as well as in Gibraltar and at sea. And of course, statements and tributes pouring in from around the world. The House of Commons in London and the Scottish and Welsh parliaments have been recalled, with members offering their condolences both in person and by video link.
I beg to move that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty, expressing the deepest sympathies of this House on the death of His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and the heartfelt thanks of this House and this nation for his unfailing dedication to this country and the Commonwealth, exemplified in his distinguished service in the Royal Navy in the Second World War, his commitment to young people in setting up the Duke of Edinburgh's award, a scheme which has touched the lives of millions across the globe, his early passionate commitment to the environment, and his unstinting support to Your Majesty throughout his life. Mr. Speaker, it is fitting that on Saturday, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh will be conveyed to his final resting place in a Land Rover which Prince Philip designed himself, with a long wheelbase and capacious rear cabin, because that vehicle's unique and idiosyncratic silhouette reminds the world that he was above all a practical man who could take something very traditional, whether a machine or indeed a great national institution, and find a way by his own ingenuity to improve it, to adapt it for the 20th and the 21st century.
That's the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson there leading tributes to the Prince Philip, who has died, of course, on Friday, and tributes there in the House of Commons in London. Well, to help us assess the relationship between Prince Philip and the Commonwealth, I'm joined now from London by the Director of the Royal African Society, Dr. Nicholas Westcott. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Westcott, for joining us. Did the Royal African Society, or indeed yourself as its head, have much interaction with Prince Philip?
I have had some interaction with him. Our royal patron used to be the Queen and is now Prince William, so it has skipped a generation. So the Duke of Edinburgh was not directly involved with the Royal African Society itself, but I have met him on a number of occasions in a former life as a diplomat. And while I was the High Commissioner to Ghana, he paid a visit in 2008, which I think was his fourth or fifth visit to the country. And like many Commonwealth countries, he came on that occasion to take part in an event for Commonwealth ex-servicemen. And he was extremely loyal to all aspects of the Commonwealth, but particularly those who served in their armed forces and those who had actually served during the colonial period. And he felt we owed a debt to those old soldiers, and he would regularly come and pay tribute to them and mix with them and chat with them, as he did on this occasion in Ghana.
And given your knowledge of course, you were sort of in Ghana there, and you've traversed the continent of Africa. You've also got connections with the royal family. How would you say that Prince Philip was viewed in Africa? Would you say that he had an impact on sentiment on the continent?
It was a mixed. He was a man of strong views, and I'd say the response was mixed. Those who worked with him on conservation activities, as I mentioned, the Commonwealth veterans, and those who knew him, met him in official capacities, I think had tremendous respect for his dedication to his job, his dedication to the Commonwealth, and his real, genuine interest in Africa. It has to be said that he was a man who spoke frankly and did not mince his words. And while he was, I think, one of the wittiest men that I've met, his wit was sometimes borderline on what we would consider these days politically correct. And this occasionally got him into hot water and gave some people the impression that his ideas were rather old-fashioned. I think, remembering my own grandfather of the same vintage, yes, attitudes have indeed changed, and maybe they don't change quite as fast amongst the older. But his real interest in and passion for Africa, I think, came across to those who had the opportunity to talk to him at any length. And therefore, I hope he will be remembered there with some fondness.
But just to sort of drill down further on that point, Dr. Westcott, I mean, I wonder if you've reflected on what Africa meant to the Duke, albeit as part of the Commonwealth that he seemed to care about so much.
I think it meant a great deal to him growing up. The British Empire was still a real thing. And he, like Her Majesty the Queen, played an integral part in the independence process. He attended many independence ceremonies. He visited Ghana with the Queen in 1961. That was his first visit. So it was almost 50 years between his first visit, soon after independence, and his final visit in 2008. So he adjusted to that, and he understood that this was an inevitable process. It was not something to be regretted, but something to be accepted. And therefore, he worked hard to try and maintain good relations after independence. I think one of the stories which your listeners may know is on independence in Kenya. He was representing the Queen at the flag lowering ceremony as the Union Jack came down and the Kenyan national flag went up. And as the British flag was coming down, it got caught. And they were stuck there, sort of gazing at it, wondering what was going to happen next. The Duke of Edinburgh leaned over to Kenyatta and said quietly, "Are you sure you don't want to change your mind?" And Kenyatta said, "No, thanks." But it was characteristic of him that he would introduce sometimes a note of levity into serious occasions, which actually helped break the ice and encouraged people to be honest and to engage with him in a relaxed and informal way, which I think he brought to all his relationships.
I had a bit of a chuckle when you were saying that here, because I mean, I've heard people, you know, in the UK, the likes of Nicholas Witchell, saying that there was a big fear about him because nobody was quite sure what he was going to say next. But of course, talking about Kenya, he and the Queen were in Africa, in Kenya, when her father, King George VI, died in 1952.
It underlines the fact that his relationship with Africa went way back to 1952 and before. In fact, as a naval officer, I believed he called in there once or twice. So he has known Africa through many ages and was always pleased to have the opportunity to welcome African leaders to Buckingham Palace when they came to visit Her Majesty, or in the Commonwealth heads of government meetings. So his knowledge was actually extraordinary. I remember talking to him while he was in Ghana, and he remembered vividly details of his first visit in 1961, of meeting Nkrumah, with whom the Queen danced on that occasion, and he danced with Mrs. Nkrumah in a way that at that time really caused astonishment in some quarters in Britain, that the Queen was entirely relaxed, dancing with a new African independent president at a moment that has caught in the series of The Crown. And it really was a symbolic moment in which the Duke of Edinburgh also took part, playing his own role.
Yes, I saw the entire series of The Crown. I sort of binge watched it, as did a lot of people. Absolutely fascinating series. But do stay with us, Dr. Westcott. We want to talk with you a little bit more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our reflections with the Director of the Royal African Society on the relationship between Prince Philip and the Commonwealth. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, leaders from Africa and from across the Commonwealth and the world are continuing to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, who died on Friday at the age of 99. The leader of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama, is one of many who've written to the Queen and her children. He said Prince Philip would be remembered for living a full and meaningful life. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari joined other world leaders in extending his condolences, calling the Duke of Edinburgh's death the end of an era and describing him as one of the greatest international figures whose contributions to the Commonwealth would be remembered for generations to come. And the South African leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, said Prince Philip was a remarkable public figure who lived an extraordinary life and who would always be remembered.
I would like to salute the memory of His Highness Prince Philip of Great Britain, who has died. I present my condolences to Queen Elizabeth II, as well as to the British people.
And that's the President of Senegal there paying his own respects to the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And the Director of the Royal African Society, Dr. Nicholas Westcott, is still with me from London, giving us his reflections on the life of Prince Philip. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Can we now assume that the British monarchy is less, or rather is likely to be less stable without his rock-like presence, or can they come together around this moment? Do you make a good prophet? Here we go again. Technical problems. We were supposed to be listening to Dr. Nicholas Westcott there, and then suddenly Nick Jennings, who's up next, appears on my big screen. But hopefully we'll get back to Mr. Westcott, Dr. Westcott, who was just telling me about his sense of whether the monarchy is likely to be more or less stable as a result of the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, whether they can come together around this moment, and whether or not he would be able to make any predictions in that direction. In the meantime, of course, Prince Harry, who, as you know, gave an interview to Oprah Winfrey along with his wife Meghan Markle, has been speaking about his grandfather, saying that all his family will remember legend of Banter Philip, as he put it. He said he said basically that Meghan, Archie and himself, as well as the future granddaughter, will always hold a special place for the Duke in their hearts. He shared a personal statement following the death of the Duke. He said that, quoting him, "My grandfather was a man of service, honor and great humor. He was authentically himself with a seriously sharp wit and could hold the attention of any room due to his charm." And I wonder if we've got Dr. Westcott back now. Right, okay. I apologize, Dr. Westcott, but I think we lost your comms for a minute there. But you were talking to us about whether or not the British monarchy is likely to be less stable as a result of the absence of the rock-like presence of Prince Philip.
Clearly a tremendous loss both to the family, to Her Majesty the Queen in particular, and to the country as a whole. But I think there's been a tremendous rallying around amongst the royal family to support their mother, their grandmother. And I think it's, as in any family, yes, there is a huge sense of loss, but there is also a feeling now that the next generation has to take up the strain. Prince Philip was undoubtedly an invaluable support to Her Majesty the Queen. He was the one person with whom she could go behind a closed door and have an entirely honest conversation. Nobody would leak it. They could tell each other exactly what they thought. And I think in that way, he was an invaluable counselor to her. But as we all know, in our own families, times pass. And I think one of the extraordinary things about the royal family has been its ability to renew itself. And not only Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, but Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, the next generation, are also taking a huge interest and stepping up to fulfill a lot of the royal functions that Prince Philip used to do. And certainly from our own experience with our royal patron, the Duke of Cambridge, he has the same ease of manner, the same wit, the same humane ability to connect with people and command their respect that his grandfather did. So I would be optimistic that the royal family will continue. It has been through bumpy times. This is clearly a time of great sadness, but it will, as I say, continue to renew itself over time.
Well, I mean, let me take you up on that, because, I mean, there are many who say the British monarchy is so old-fashioned, such an anachronism and a ridiculous kind of feudal fossil. But then others want this kind of mooring to memory and tradition and to figures who don't represent political egomania, and a kind of profit of their own self-interest. I mean, how big is either side in Britain, and how much does it vary according to age?
It's a tough job, and the royal family has been through varied fortunes. Times when it was quite unpopular, republicanism was becoming increasingly popular. Around the time of Princess Diana's death was a bad time. But again, the respect with which the Queen herself is regarded, and the ability of the monarchy, the royal family, to connect at different generations. And I think the impact that both Princes William and Harry have had on the public mind will connect with younger people. Now, recent events have obviously posed something of a challenge in the perception of the royal family. Is it very old-fashioned? Is it not as diverse as it should be to reflect Britain today? And I think that is a challenge that they have to respond to. But I think they're also aware of that. And I think we may, over time, and I hope relatively short time, see changes taking place that will enable it to connect to the people of the country.
Just returning to Prince Philip himself, beyond the sort of the broader question of the monarchy and its survivability, we've heard it said many times that Prince Philip was the longest serving consort in UK history, and he gave the impression of going in and out of stages of comfort and happiness with that role. But I mean, he certainly carried it out, didn't he? Over 70 years at the Queen's side. I mean, that's quite remarkable.
It is extraordinary. I think for any marriage to last 73 years is a tremendous tribute to both of the partners involved. He was always 100% loyal to his wife, to Her Majesty the Queen. That was where he felt his role was. And while clearly it would be frustrating for a man as capable and as full of leadership as himself to sometimes play the role stepping two steps behind the Queen, but his loyalty was to her, and he gave her all the support that she needed throughout those 73 years in which they were married. In fact, I think she herself has implied it would have been hugely harder for her if she had not had him by her side. And they were a team, definitely a team, and that has been, I think, one of the strengths of the monarchy.
Right, and of course, attention now turning to his funeral, which is coming up on Saturday. It'll be a ceremonial funeral, not a state funeral, and pretty much a pared down event. What's the reaction in Britain to that?
I think there's a degree of frustration in that there are an awful lot of people who would like to show their appreciation, their loyalty, their respect for him in public. But the COVID restrictions remain in place. We are not allowed to meet more than 6 in a group out of doors, and therefore the authorities are discouraging such public displays. en masse of our respect. So there's a degree of frustration, but we understand the need to maintain vigilance against the threat that the COVID pandemic poses for all of us. And so I think people will watch it on television and they will say their private farewells to Prince Philip in their own way. So a little bit frustrated, but understanding in the circumstances, this is the best thing to do.
And just on the Prince himself, again, I mean, he had this reputation, or certainly a lot of people, particularly people in positions like your own, where you sort of travel around the world. I mean, you were a sort of diplomat and that sort of thing, and he would turn up. And a lot of them remember him for the gaffes, I mean, some of which were made on those many foreign visits. I mean, notably in places like China, where he talked about, you know, the slit eyes and so on. I wonder if beyond sort of the one that you mentioned in Ghana, if there are any particular ones that sort of made you more apprehensive going forward, that who knows what's likely to happen next sort of situation.
He was a man who spoke his mind, and as I said before, he wasn't always attuned to the degrees of political correctness that were changing over time. But he was extremely witty, and to give one example, when we're in Ghana, we had a dinner with President Kufuor, as then was, together with the Anglican Archbishop of Ghana, who was present as well, who had just returned from the Lambeth Conference of all the bishops in the Anglican Communion. And President Kufuor turned to the Archbishop and said, "So what do you call a congregation of bishops?" And instantly the Duke of Edinburgh replied, "You call it a surplice." And for those of you familiar with Anglican ceremony, that was a very witty reply. And that was the kind of thing. He didn't stop to think, is this a correct thing? It was just a spontaneous thing he would do. Therefore, yes, some people found some of the things he said offensive. And we can't deny that. There's plenty of recorded incidents. But it didn't come from any sense of malice or prejudice. He treated all people equally.
Right, and we've got less than a minute, and thank you for staying with us. Where do you think this leaves the Queen, though, who is herself quite advanced in age? Because, I mean, we know she is steadfast and strong, but she will clearly and surely miss him. There will be the emotional shock that he's finally passed away. Is that likely to leave her and you know, weaker? We've got 30 seconds.
A period of mourning is necessary, but anyone who has been bereaved will understand the sense of loneliness, the sense of loss, and that's very real. The family will support her, and she is, I think, more than anyone else I know, somebody dedicated to her duty, and she will return to work as soon as she is able, because she believes that is what her role, her job, her duty is, and she will persevere with it.
Dr. Nicholas Witchell, Director of the Royal African Society, I want to thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us your reflections on the life of Prince Philip. And Dr. Westcott was speaking to me from London. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, as we'll get more details about the upcoming ceremonial funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh from Arise editorial director Nick Jennings. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Inigoolu. Now, politicians in Britain have been paying tribute to the Queen's late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, following his death on Friday. The House of Commons in London and the Scottish and Welsh parliaments have been recalled, and the House of Lords, which had already been due to sit on Monday, has taken part in a minute's silence, with peers also giving their tributes, and the day's scheduled business being put back to Wednesday. Meanwhile, details have been released of the Prince's funeral, which will take place next Saturday. It will be a ceremonial, not a state funeral, and will be fully televised. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from Southeast England by Arise editorial director Nick Jennings. Good to speak with you, Nick. What are the latest plans for the funeral? I understand they were drawn up, at least in part, by Prince Philip himself.
Well, yes, indeed. He had enough time, obviously, to prepare the conditions that he wanted for his funeral. We know that he wasn't a man who liked to fuss. He wasn't that keen on pomp and ceremony. And he did lay out some of the details of how he wanted his final journey to be undertaken. Some of those details have been released. Of course, the funeral will happen on Saturday. Events will begin around 2:45 in the afternoon in Windsor Castle, when his body will be taken out of the room where he's been lying, not in state, but lying there for the family. It will then be put on a Land Rover. This is the interesting thing, this was his wishes, that it's going to be the coffin will be placed on a modified Land Rover, it's being called, and then within the grounds of Windsor Castle will then be taken to St. George's Chapel. Behind it will be following members of the royal family. We believe that will include Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry. It will also be flanked by members of the armed forces, from the Grenadier Guards and, of course, the Royal Marines, of which he was a former Captain General before he handed that over to Prince Harry. The cortege will then make its way to the chapel in where the Archbishop of Canterbury will preside over the official funeral rites, and it's believed that Prince Charles will give the eulogy. Now, this is at the moment just the framework. We understand that there will be a full dress rehearsal involving members of the royal family taking place on Thursday, and there may, of course, be some changes to the programme. But I think the important thing to make is this is not, as you said, a full ceremonial royal funeral, but it is a royal funeral. There will be no public access, and there is, of course, due to COVID restrictions, all sorts of things in place, such as masks, compulsory mask wearing and social distancing. So that's what we know so far, Charles.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Nick, for that summary. So a pared down funeral, if you like, perhaps even smaller than the Duke would have wanted because of, as you said, COVID restrictions. So would you say there's a fine line between giving him a funeral with the sort of reverence it deserves and giving him an unexceptional funeral in a year of so much grief and devastating loss?
Well, I think ultimately it's his wishes that have to be paramount in this, Charles. I mean, you can't escape the fact that not only the British public, but the world will be watching this, and it will be carried out with all the precision such as a ceremony entails. But you're not going to see the whole sort of funeral procession through the streets of London and the streets full of people attending the event. They've been told that the public have been told to stay at home, to not go to Windsor, to not leave any flowers. So it will, in fact, be a very, very reduced ceremony. But I'm sure it will have all the solemnity that is required on the occasion.
And of course, when this first broke, Nick, we saw quite a lot of people going to Buckingham Palace, going to Windsor Castle, to sort of drop flowers and that sort of thing. And there were exhortations to the public not to gather or congregate around those palaces or to come to Windsor. I mean, have people been pretty much heeding those calls?
Well, by and large, I think, Charles, it's going to be important to see what happens on Saturday itself. There will, of course, be barriers and restrictions to stop people actually going any closer than is required towards the Windsor Castle, but the town itself will be open. I'm sure people will want to pay their respects and lay flowers, of course. But the most important thing people are being told is to stay away and to heed the wishes of the family at this very poignant moment.
Absolutely. And of course, Nick, that there will be public participation thanks to television. I mean, that is the sense in which the funeral will be public, because it'll be relayed in the UK and around the world on television and radio.
Well, yes, indeed it will, Charles. And of course, there has been a sort of torrent of coverage on the screens in the UK and around the world, so much so that there's been a lot of complaints, actually, particularly on Friday and Saturday, when the BBC, the main state broadcaster, and other terrestrial broadcast organizations basically threw away their normal programming schedule and did wall-to-wall coverage of the Duke's life and the arrangements and the story, etc. So much so that there was a torrent of complaints that people were missing their favorite programs. And if you look at the ratings over that weekend, both the BBC and ITN, the main ITV, the main commercial broadcaster, had very low, a very considerable drop in viewers' figures. So I think to some extent there's been a sort of a bit of a sort of the blanket coverage hasn't necessarily meant that more and more people want to watch extended coverage of this.
And Nick, you and I were talking about this when we spoke this morning, and I also talked about this briefly with Dr. Nicholas Westcott, who was on before you, the director of the Royal African Society. I wonder what your thoughts are on what impact the Prince Philip's death is likely to have on the stability of the British monarchy. I mean, is it something that might bring them together and perhaps strengthen the monarchy or weaken it?
Well, that's a very good question, Charles. I mean, I can't add to the torrent of tributes and anecdotes that have been paid to the Duke, the man, the family man, the grandfather, etc. I did meet him on two occasions briefly, and I was taken by his very firm handshake and his very steely grip and his very brusque attitude towards the media, of which I was one, obviously. But as far as the family is concerned, obviously it's been, a tough time for them, not only with his death, but with the other undercurrents and the disagreements involving Prince Harry and why he's left the royal family as such and gone to live in California. But the Queen has spoken about the void that the loss of the Duke of Edinburgh will leave in her life, and I think it's more important about what the void will be when the Queen departs her mortal coil, because she has been, she will be celebrating her 70th anniversary on the throne next year, Charles. So she's been ever present through some of the most tumultuous events over the last 70 years. And she is very much the figurehead of the royal family. And I think there is a big question mark about when she goes, what is the glue that is going to hold the royal family together? And will it have the same affection in the public as, of course, the Queen has and continues to have?
And for you personally, Nick, I mean, you met him a number of times. You did talk about that briefly. But as a Brit yourself, I mean, how do you actually feel? Do you feel like this is the end of an era?
Well, I think it is an end of an era in many ways. And I think, he stood for a lot of values that not everybody agrees with these days. The modern world has moved on a lot. Where the royal family stands in the sort of, pantheon of public acclaim and public interest, I think is very different now than it was 20 years ago and 40 years ago. It is a different world. There is a sort of, Republican movement, and I'm not saying that it's gathering more momentum than it's had over the last. The whole, Great Britain is in quite a difficult situation.
Right, Nick, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we've run out of time. Nick Jennings, Arise editorial director there. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and London, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.